Hi, this is Marlene, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found on MiamiGhostChronicles.com. Go to MarlenePardo.com for information on new book releases. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and can also be listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests on the show. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit Strange Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com or find us on Blogspot. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful.
Changed in vibe a little bit, but what that has meant for me is that I feel that there's this substratum underlying all of this, where it's the same race that I had contact with when I was a kid that was responsible for the phenomena I experienced when I was a child, as today. And even though there was a little bit of a different feeling to some of it at certain stages, nonetheless, there's this relationship and this continuity. So yeah, when I was a little kid, I used to have experiences where I'd wake up in the middle of the night, wander around, not be able to wake any of my family. So it's a fairly large family, had 5 other siblings, and my mum and dad there as well, living at the house. Just couldn't wake them up, but I'd feel drawn outside where there'd be luminous people levitating. Okay. Another time I went out, there was a dark shape on a boat that was in our front yard that my dad had built. When I looked up at it, it jumped down on me and swept me up into a sack and ran off with me.
Oh my God.
And stopped when I was screaming and felt into the sack and stroked me and patted my face and then started running again. And then I had missing time and I was back at home hysterical. These weird experiences, I'm not quite sure exactly how many I had over my childhood, but I'd have them sort of peppered about, memories of having these strange nighttime experiences.
And none of your siblings had any experiences?
I suspect they did. I haven't spoken in detail to them about these kinds of things. Certainly my parents themselves have had interesting experiences in their childhood and also as adults, and they're both still alive and healthy in their 80s in the house that I originally grew up in. They still have like poltergeist activity happening and things like that.
So they're still even in that same location then?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And I now live a few towns away from there. For a while, I lived up in the Dandenongs in another part of the state of Victoria, where I'm from in Australia. For years, my wife and I lived up, and I worked on a tree farm, as a wholesale tree farm. I had a few experiences happen up there where I wake up and there'd be tall, fair people in my room, and they'd run out through the walls once I went up to make contact with them. One time I woke up to see a small blonde girl with huge blue eyes that was crouching down near me. And I tried to, my mind's just working at 1,000,000 miles an hour when you wake up and there's someone there with you. So I actually, which is a bit embarrassing to admit, I tried to kick her and I lashed out at her and she ran around the edge of the bed and shot out the wall. So and then during the day as well, I had a particular experience when I was a kid that I saw a being behind a pine tree, a dark being that looked like it was shaped that had the texture of the pine tree bark, 4 long fingers, huge black eyes, a triangular shaped face with kind of ridges on the top of its head. And I was about to turn 5. I worked out with my sister when that would have been that I'd seen that. I was about a month off turning 5 years old, and I remember this, and I used to talk to people about it when I was a kid. This gave me a lifelong interest in fairies and elves because I presumed it was a fairy or an elf. Since then, as an adult, I've seen these suits since in abduction experiences, and they're a kind of a suit that can cloak. At night, they have glowing red eyes. They're a technology. They can become intangible to pass through solid objects. So the reason I call these beings cryptoterrestrials is I took the name from a guy called Mac Tonnies, anyway, who wrote a book, The Cryptoterrestrials, a meditation on indigenous humanoids and the aliens among us. Mac Tonnies passed away as quite a young man, unfortunately. I think he was only 34 when he passed away in 2009. But his book was published posthumously.
Okay.
And he had the theory that the UFOnauts, or the beings or race piloting flying saucers and UFOs that we see, or responsible for close encounter phenomena like abduction phenomena and things like this, that they are more likely indigenous to this planet and hidden. So cryptoterrestrials as hidden earthlings, rather than being extraterrestrials from outside the Earth, because they seem to be interested in our DNA. You know, you have this sort of theme running through a UFO abduction law that they take DNA samples from us, or occasionally even like in the old-fashioned way copulate with us. There's a few cases like that, like Peter Curry's case in Australia in 1992, where a 7-foot-tall chalk white woman with huge blue eyes, 2 to 3 times the size of our eyes, fine white hair, he woke up in this situation, like a kind of a succubus or Yaman fairy lover situation. That also happened to Antonio Villas-Boas in 1957 in Brazil, with a woman with huge blue eyes, fine white hair. They are very, and also the fairies and elves. You know, if we consider the fairies and the elves to be older interpretations, folkloric interpretations of genuine experiences to a certain extent that people were having in the past with the same beings that are responsible for the UFO.
Right, because you hear among the fairies about that the thing of the changeling.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
When they would take a human child and exchange it for a fairy child.
That's right. Yeah, and also fairy lovers coming to houses or calling people away to have trysts with them in the forest at night or in the earth. And you get this continuity. So Mac Tonnies had this idea of cryptoterrestrials, which could be an umbrella term for not only, you know, elves and fairy phenomena of early times, but also ET aliens of today. You know, and you get these really strong parallels, like when you look at like characteristics and traits of like the fairies or elves of, let's say, the Celtic fairy faith of Europe compared to some of the ET races that people talk about today. So, you know, Nahuishlan, the gentry, the Gaelic gentry, were tall, fair elves that lived in the earth in subterranean caverns and caves in mountains. They would become luminous and levitate around. They would enter people's houses and play tricks on them. And like poltergeist, moving things about, playing with people's minds, could become invisible at will, would chirp and whistle as a language to each other. So when you think about this, then you think about a case like Charles James Hall, who I'm not sure if your listeners will be familiar with Charles Hall's testimony. He claims to have been a weather observer stationed at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada in the 60s, where his job was to go out into the desert in Indian Springs with a theodolite to measure release balloons and just basically track them and call in the wind speed and things like that back to base. He was stationed there for 2 years. While he was there, he claims to have had prolonged and regular interaction with a tall, fair race of non-human beings that lived in the mountains, that whistled and chirped, that would become luminous and levitate about, that would enter his hut and play tricks on him as poltergeists and move things around on him. So you have these identical descriptions from ancient times and then fairly modern of elves on one hand and ETs on the other hand. And these same beings that Charles Hall describes, and also in ancient fairy lore, Nahuishlan, are the same beings that I've been having contact with all my life. And I prefer the term cryptoterrestrial for them because they have this genetic affiliation with us. They're closely related to us. They're originally from Earth, although they are spacefaring with advanced technologies where they have at certain times been interstellar. So you could say that they're extraterrestrials in a sense as well because they have the capacity for that. But and I just became so passionate after I was interested in fairies and elves over my life. my interest switched to ET UFO abductions and lore, because as I became older, some of the experiences I was having, as I said before, were becoming more sort of UFO-like, or like extraterrestrial, like waking up to be on a bed having a procedure with the tall beings with black lenses over their eyes, which they put in. They have huge blue eyes, but they put these black lenses in that I presume is like a smart tech or medical tech. Huge, four long fingers with like a, what do you call it? Like a vestigial thumb.
Okay.
Further up their hand. Checking my teeth, drilling into the back of my skull, and intensely painful operations that they said was.
Are you equating them to like what the people call the Greys then?
I think sometimes they might be called tall Greys.
Okay, the tall Greys.
People
okay.
normally call them tall whites, or sometimes they're called Nordics as well. It depends on how they present themselves, because they have long white or blonde hair that's quite fine, or sometimes it's short, but often you see it sort of shoulder length. When they're in these kind of medical scenarios, though, they have like skull caps on, just like our own medical professionals, looking over their face, black lenses over their eyes, and tight white outfits. And then they sort of look even like giant mantis beings once they're dressed up.
I have heard of that description, that mantis kind of like appearance. Yes.
7, 8, 9 foot tall, depending as they become advanced. They take a long time to grow. So different people have had interactions with these beings through the centuries, and nowadays, probably more famous accounts of this particular race that call themselves the Majeena, which are the same beings as those in the, on the glyphs, the petroglyphs in Western Australia and the Kimberley that are called the Wandjina.
Okay.
But they actually call themselves the Majeena, which is the same word. I'm pretty sure that in Zulu cultures, there's also the Wandjina, which was a race of non-humans. And I think these are all cognate, etymologically linked words, their own word for themselves. But usually they're called tall whites. But yeah, sometimes they're called tall greys. When they're dressed in their dark suits, glowing red eyes, a long nose-like appendage that amplifies and resonates sound so that they can roar and project hooting sounds and powerful sounds to communicate over long distances, also to instill fear into us, to scare us away from their underground habitations in national parks and state parks. But they have these skin-tight, dark suits that can cloak, that have a dark, circular technology on the chest. I'm not quite sure what that is, like a breathing device. In these outfits, I think sometimes they're called tall greys or tall black aliens and things like this. I think this particular race is responsible for massive amounts of different characters or understandings in ufology, or also in paranormal research in general, because it's my understanding that these suits are what's responsible for Mothman as well. They can levitate. When they're levitating, if they're not cloaking and they levitate, they blur, and a nebulous distortion appears around them that kind of looks like wings. Like I've got this picture on the front of my book.
That's very much that if I saw that, I would say that looks like a Mothman type of, with the red eyes. Yeah.
That's that's a wonderful picture that was done by Mark Randall. I sent him the artist that did the cover for my book. I sent him.
Do you consider them totally organic? And the reason why I'm asking you is that I've heard, the shorter grays, the smaller ones. I've heard the theory that in some cases they're more biomechanical and sometimes used as collectors, but they're not totally organic. Are the ones you're talking about organic, totally organic, as in no mechanics?
Totally organic and closely genetically affiliated with us. It's the same genus, really. You'd call them, like I call them in my book, Homo Orionis, because they've spent a good deal of time and been associated with the middle star of Orion's belt, Al-Nalam. But I'm not quite sure if you'd see them as being a separate species to us in the same genus, or just a subspecies, because they can interbreed with us. They're so closely related to us, they can interbreed with us. They have advanced really incredibly robust technologies that appear as magic to us, but nonetheless nuts and bolts. They have flesh and blood, they're nuts and bolts, but they can manipulate through science and technology to such an extent that I suppose the distinctions between, immaterial reality and material reality and that start to break down. Because once you've got a science and a technology that can allow you to pass through solid objects, open portals, and things like this, it's like, hold on, are these spiritual beings now? The technology is so advanced, they've leapt into some other.
So what do you think? They're capable then of intra-dimensional travel then? Or at least open a pocket? Yeah.
I think so, yeah. And also just the use of portals to leap about on this planet as well, to utilize natural wormholes. And when they do that, depending on the size of the object passing through, there is often a sound. So if it's an entire ship, there might be a boom. If it's just an individual, it might be just a crack, like a click. Like you might just be sitting in your house and all of a sudden you hear click over in the corner, and then you look and there might be a slight shape or a shadow. And that's and they're cloaking and they still project. They still cast shadows and things like that, or sometimes appear as shadow people. Which is why people that have involvement with UFOs and ETs are often haunted by shadow people as well, which are the same beings but in their suits. And they will investigate people. So if you're like a paranormal investigator, and you go to a particular place that you think is haunted or where there's the UFOs seen, and then you get what people call hijackers, and you get the phenomenon following you home.
Yes.
Playing tricks on you. You wake up on the night, there's a dark shape, then's gone. You hear voices in your house, footsteps and things like that, boots on the roof, this kind of thing. And you're like, oh dear, I brought something home with me. They have their own system of intelligence gathering. If you've taken an interest in them, they'll take an interest in you. It can even spread out to people that you know and your family and things like that, as they generally take and record information about you, just like an intelligence agency would.
You mentioned something about the parks, and I wanted to come back to this. I'm sure you've heard of the missing 411, all these disappearances all over the world, and usually national parks, I guess. And supposedly after you say they discount people that basically have purposely disappeared, or suicides, mental illness, or animal attacks, there's still a large number. Do you think that they're tied into that in any way?
Yeah, for sure, especially hunters that go missing. So you know how that's a category that David Paulides with his missing 411 talks about, of course, and divides it up into different, children that go missing, academics and intellectuals and scientists and things that go missing, but also hunters that disappear or that end up miles away from where they should be, or their boots are found and they're never found again, and this kind of thing. I think at least some of that, I don't want to say all of it or most of it, but some of that is attributable to these guys, because they can be incredibly aggressive, they can be lethal, they can respond in aggressive ways if they feel that they're under threat or their children are. And if there's malicious and aggressive intent on the part of a person, armed with a lethal weapon, a firearm, hunting deer, say, in a national park or state park or areas that are where hunting's a go for a particular period, if they shoot at, even accidentally, a Majeena, especially their child, they'll kill them. So this is they don't mess about. They believe in a death for a death as well. So if someone's unlucky enough to accidentally kill one of their members, they've got no hope. But even there's probably overreaction on their part sometimes as well. But yeah, the hunters, that category.
Oh, you even hear of some of them where, and that you mentioned earlier, where some people have even heard basically a mimic or something that will draw a certain person in. Either they hear who they think, somebody they know, calling them.
Yeah, I think that they do that kind of thing as well. They can do sometimes to save people, and sometimes perhaps if they have taken a dislike to someone and think that they're malicious, aggressive, or going to be harmful in some way, disagreeable to them, in an area where they happen to be residing at the time in the under the mountain, because they travel around the Earth and follow the warmth, and they have habitations all across the globe, under the ocean, in wilderness areas, and sometimes places are left dormant. If it's cold, their habitations won't have anyone there, but if it's particularly warm in a certain place, and it's a national park, state park, or a wilderness area, there's a good possibility if they've got a habitation there, there's going to be members of their population occupying it. Then hunters should be incredibly careful, because Charles Hall spoke about this as well. People taking shots at tall white children in Nevada, thinking that they were bighorn sheep, and being killed by the tall whites. As for other categories, I'm not sure. I think they do help children. If children are lost in those kinds of situations, if a child's lost in a forest, they will call out to them or steer them, because they have technologies that can manipulate your mind that they call mesmerization. They can instill fear into your mind to repel you out of a situation. You'll suddenly feel visceral, illogical fear, and you'll leave. Or they can fill your mind with love and acceptance as well, to remove you as a threat, so that you feel you're flooded with endorphins and you feel happy, and all of a sudden you're not a threat to them anymore. Or if you're in trouble, they can instill ideas into your mind, abstract ideas about where to go, or even speak to you in your mind in telepathic communication. It's linguistic, like a silent voice in your head that's sort of like the kind of voice you might hear when you're just reading silently to yourself, like a silent reading voice.
Yeah.
But intrusive and not your own voice, telling you what to do and to go somewhere, or leading you to water or to food. I think as well, and they're biased as well, in the sense that they'll make judgments. They'll make value judgments about different people that they encounter in their areas, because they know everything about you. They read your mind and understand everything you've done, who you are, your reasons for being there. And if they've taken a shining to you and they like you and you're lost or something like that, they'll help you. But it could go the other way.
Right. Yeah. Just for. Yeah. And do you think that all your encounters since childhood were connected to them, or do you think there's any other group that you've had contact with?
I have much more vague memories of there being another shorter group with dark skin and wrinkly faces.
Okay.
But I'm not sure about that. And sometimes I draw sketches of my experiences, and sometimes I sort of get myself into sort of what I think is probably like a bit of a light hypnosis as I'm doing the sketch, to bring the memories out and bring out more detail. And I have drawn one of these smaller, darker beings as well. And they're called the tall whites. Tall whites call themselves Majeena, but they call these smaller, darker beings Sabetina, and and they call them little brothers, and they're an allied race. I think, and they have claws on their hands, large, dark claws. I think they in themselves have perhaps given rise to a lot of beliefs in maybe goblins and things like that over the years, dwelling in the earth, but smaller beings, wrinkly faces, big dark eyes. Sort of like the idea of a grey, but dark brown, not actually grey.
Do you think they're responsible for, like, when you see these cattle mutilations or the crop circles, or are we talking somebody else?
I think some crop circles are them. The famous crabwood crop circle from 2002 that shows a being holding a disc with binary on it. That is an image of one of them with a helmet on. And it has Orion's belt, three dots in the crop circle, made into the crop circle. There's also 3 dots behind the right shoulder of the being, slightly misaligned in the layout of Orion's belt, Al-Nataka al-Nalam Mintaka. So they even signed that crop circle as being them. So they are responsible for some crop circles at least. And there have been other reports. I think there was a policeman in England that came across tall, fair people in a crop circle that ran away at incredible speed. They can move really, really fast. Ran away at high speed, and then he had hitchhikers. Then he was haunted by shadow people. he'd hear a knock on his door. He'd go to his door, and there'd be like an 8-foot tall dark shadow person that would then disappear. This is typical haunting for them. Once they have a relationship with you, they interact with you and leave phenomena that normally would be interpreted as something like poltergeist or deceased individuals, like ghosts, something like that, but which is them in these cases anyway. Crop circles. As for cattle mutilations, yes, they are responsible for some cattle mutilations, and so were fairies and elves in ancient lore. The primary drive for them, I believe, is intimidation.
Okay.
If you are a rancher and you are too close to an area where they have an underground habitation that they reside in at different times of the year, and you have dogs, they're particularly against dogs. They don't like dogs. They slash their throats. They kill dogs. They have this. They're frightened of dogs, and dogs also can perceive them. You know, dogs seem to have this sort of preternatural capability of perceiving things that maybe humans can't.
Yes.
So when they're cloaking and they prefer us not to see them, sometimes dogs will sense this. So dogs are dangerous to them, but also incredibly annoying. You know, and some dogs get themselves taken out by them. You know, even John Keel and the Mothman prophecies talked about, you know, UFO flaps. If there's a lot of UFO sightings in an area, it'll often coincide with a lot of dogs having their throats cut in neighborhoods. And this is them moving around and not having any sense of humor about domesticated guard dogs.
Right.
Because they have issues with their, I'm sort of getting off track here, but they have flaws with their DNA. Their genomic structures is unraveling, which is one of the reasons, which is the reason why they interbreed with us. Healthy DNA. Part of their issues is they've done too much genetic engineering, and they've altered themselves to such an extent that there's been side effects and symptoms like even though they've lengthened their lifespans through genetic engineering, it's meant that they have certain diseases and maladies that we don't have, allergies that we don't have, very slow healing speeds. If they get cut, it takes a lot longer to heal. And bacterial infections kill them much more easily than they would us. So if a dog were to bite them, get through their technologies and bite them, and they don't very, very quickly get medical help, they're dead. Whereas that might be something that we just shrug off. You know, we take it.
Right. Something that for us is a scratch, for them to be life-threatening.
That's right. So, and they rely on their technologies to such an extent, like force fields becoming intangible, things like this, to avoid being stung by bees or ants, which can kill them like that as well. They're allergic to that kind of stuff.
Oh, they're also to this insect bites and things like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But the cattle stuff, mutilating cattle, and what they used to do to farmers in ancient Ireland and Scotland and in Europe in general, I believe, was if you're grazing cattle too close to where they have underground habitations, they will kill the cattle. And this is something that they've always done. This is another point of continuity between the old law and modern UFO law, you know.
Okay. And because, see, this is the thing. Sometimes I've spoken, I used to belong when I was down living in Miami, to a UFO group. And you know how people talk, and more than one person told me that after they saw a UFO, no abduction, just they saw a sighting, then they started having paranormal experiences inside their house. And they couldn't figure out, what does one thing have to do the other? Because for them, it's like, this is a UFO sighting, lights in the sky kind of thing, far away. And then all of a sudden, I'm having paranormal phenomena inside my house, which I've lived for inside of several years. And they couldn't quite. And more than one person told me similar stories, that they had this thing, like where one thing dovetailed. And something you mentioned, this stuff, some of the stuff went on for years.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Inside their home.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like when people say to me, you know, my house is haunted. I'm having this I'm seeing shadow people, hearing voices in the house, things like that. My mind goes straight to, you may be a CT experiencer, rather than going, oh, your house is haunted by spirits or something like that. But that's just where my mind lies. But those two things go hand in hand for sure. If you're having ET abduction phenomena, but also even just say witnessing UFOs,
Right.
to then be haunted and have this kind of attention from some kind of paranormal presence where you feel something's there, you feel uncertain, you notice things are going missing to be replaced later, and this kind of stuff. Yeah, for sure. And I suppose some people might find it a scary thing. I don't find this kind of thing scary anymore, even though maybe once some of the ideas were a bit scary to me. But if a person's seeing UFOs and then their house is also being haunted, they're probably having a lot of experiences they're not being allowed to remember, because that's another ability that the fairies and elves had, of course, in older times, but also is a very common theme, of course, in modern UFO lore: missing time. And what is missing time? It's not time, literally time dilation. It's not like time travel. It is scenes missing.
Right.
Sometimes to be reaccessed by hypnotic regression, perhaps. Sometimes it'll come back in dreams. Sometimes it'll just come back to you in waking life. You remember something all of a sudden. But if someone's having that kind of attention in their house and they've also seen unidentified flying objects, I'd suggest there's probably interactions with cryptoterrestrials happening in their life, particularly at night, that they're not being allowed to remember.
Right.
Their technologies, they're very highly manipulative technologies, and they wear them in their helmets, so they don't seem to be any more naturally telepathic or psychic than we are.
It's just that they have developed a technology, is what you're saying?
Yeah, they wear in these helmets that they wear some different shapes and sized helmets depending on what their task seems to be. But they wear in their helmets technologies that allow them to implant thoughts into your head, to wipe and remove memories, send linguistic messages into your head, like voices or whatever, or images as well, to take over your eyes and to project so that your mind's eye sees images and things like that of places they want you to see, perhaps to calm you sometimes or to provide information. But a large part of this thing is memory manipulation. So they actually said to me, "We apologize for the mesmerization and we apologize for the memory alterations." And I said to them, "That's okay, dudes. You probably know what you're doing." Lots of memories have come back to me of things that have happened, particularly in my childhood, that have been erased at a certain point. They're not permanently erased. It's like they fold them over
into your subconscious mind.
Inside other memories. Yeah.
Exactly. And do you think that there's a link? Because I've spoken to other guests that say sometimes there's if there's an uptick of UFO sightings or even abductions, there's also an uptick in sightings of cryptids.
Yeah. I think well, they can use. Well, that's another capacity they have. Hallucinations. Like they can tap into a person's mind and they can present what would have been called once upon a time in older folklore and things, glamories or a glamour.
Yes.
To make themselves look like someone that they're not actually shape-shifting physically, but they're projecting a thought into your mind so that they look like your mother, they look like your uncle, they look like your neighbor. That tells you something, and then you realize, hold on a sec, my mum's inside. So it's like a doppelganger phenomena, perhaps, but
yes,
but like a mimic. I think perhaps sometimes cryptid phenomena are explainable in that way, where you're seeing things they're making you see that aren't really there. Sometimes when they're seen in their suits, they might be thought of as being Bigfoot. Sometimes because they can be 7, 8, 9, 10 foot tall. They chirp and bark and growl and hoot, which is often sounds attributed to Bigfoot.
Yes,
but the Sierra sounds tall whites, not Bigfoot. I mean, this is something I haven't put it in this book, but this is something I put on my YouTube channel. I talk about a bit. People interested in Sasquatch and Bigfoot are not happy with me saying this kind of thing, of course. But I talked to Ron Moorhead about this, the guy who recorded the Sierra sounds as well.
Yes, I've interviewed Ron. Yes, it's very interesting. I've listened to his recordings. Yes.
And I said to him that, in my opinion, that the samurai chatter, the way they speak, it sounds like deep, resonant almost like the way a Japanese spoken in a sort of deep masculine kind of way, like maybe you'd hear on anime or you'd hear on samurai movies or something like that, interspersed with barking sounds, growling, whistling, chirping, and all this kind of stuff. This is what I've heard them. This is them. This is the way. This is their natural language mixed with camouflage codes as well to sound like animals sometimes, but their natural language sounds like, to a Westerner's ears anyway, so that to me sounds like Japanese. I thought it was Japanese when I first heard it. I've had them speak it to me and at me a few times, but don't understand what they're saying. Now, there's another tall white experiencer from Spain in the 70s that Julio Fernandez in 1978 was taken on board a flying saucer by tall, pale beings, 6.5 to 7 foot tall with huge blue eyes that barked and spoke in what he said sounded like cries of the martial arts of the Orient. And when he talked to a ufologist who played different different world languages to him and said, "What language do you think it sounds most like?" He settled on Korean. He said it sounds a lot like Korean.
Okay.
And Korean and Japanese, to a Western ears anyway, sound similar to
Right. Without actually understanding the language, I understand what you're saying. The way it's spoken, the inflection.
Yeah, for sure. And he'd originally described it as sounding like a cross between German and Chinese. He said German for its guttural features, Chinese for its monosyllabic features. But then when he actually listened to selections of languages, he settled on Korean. So when people are seeing dark, huge people moving around through the forest that are hooting and growling and barking and stuff like this, sometimes this is considered to be Bigfoot. But another thing ties in with this. Now, Bigfoot may exist. I don't know, But another thing ties in with this, that cryptids in places where there seem to be underground habitations may also be something that is like another tool in the toolkit of cryptoterrestrials to instill fear in people and to repel them from places. Like famously at Skinwalker Ranch.
Yes.
Which is definitely has an underground Majeena habitation there or in the Mesa or under the property, because the craft that described there are typical of cryptoterrestrial craft. The RVs, some of their craft look like white recreational vehicles without wheels.
Yes.
And Charles Hall described them in Nevada. The ranchers of Skinwalker Ranch saw these craft being piloted by giants that left huge footprints. So these are the cryptoterrestrials. But also you see cryptids, so Bigfoot, giant wolves, other kinds of giant canids with huge bushy tails.
Right.
Creatures that kind of look like small dinosaurs maybe being seen and then disappearing, being beamed up by Scotty, so the rancher seeing this dire wolf, this giant wolf that was attacking his lamb, and the rancher shot at it with a high-powered rifle.
And it was totally unafraid of the humans.
That's right, no pain response.
Right.
And just trotted off like it's not alive, like it's not real. And then the flesh left behind on the ground, blown out the back of it by this high-powered rifle, was described as decaying. So whether the beast itself was decaying or whether the flesh began decaying rapidly once it left the animal, who knows? But it's suggesting that these creatures are not really alive, or if they are alive, they're temporary. So I've called them TLFs, transient life forms, or transitory life forms, or something like that. And perhaps sometimes Bigfoot is this, like the use of previously thought extinct giant monstrous mammals, like giant wolves, giant hairy hominids, like a Sasquatch-like creature that may have existed, hundreds of thousands of years ago, but does no longer. These are used to keep people away. Perhaps that's a possibility. In another famous ranch case in Colorado, that Tim Good wrote about, it's like a sister case to Skinwalker Ranch, where you got all of these, slew of the same kind of paranormal, weird phenomena, poltergeist stuff, disembodied voices, telepathy, tricks being played on the ranches, and cattle mutilations, and dogs being killed, and UFOs being seen, and the rancher in that particular case in Colorado got to meet the beings behind it. He actually had a meeting with two individuals that had huge eyes, fair hair, and were wearing tight-fitting and helmets, wearing tight-fitting suit that was changing colors as he was talking to them. And they said to him, "We are going to allow you to remember this, but this isn't really working out. We don't want you here. We have to work out some kind of agreement." As they were saying this to him, there was a cube on the ground, allegedly, a cube sitting on the ground. And the rancher went near it, and the two beings said, "Don't touch that." And then a Bigfoot, this is what the guy says, a Bigfoot-type creature walked out of the trees over to the cube, touched it, and fell down either paralyzed or dead. And the two beings with the big eyes said to the rancher, "You see, these cubes are lethal. Don't approach them." Now, if that Bigfoot had been a living creature, that seems incredibly cruel to just prove some point.
Right.
But if that Bigfoot was not truly alive, but was more like the dire wolf that the rancher at Skinwalker Ranch had been shooting,
Right.
then they're sort of flesh automatons or something, or
It makes you wonder, have they been able to what I'm thinking of, almost like regenerate, maybe an extinct, but their lifespan is very short. In other words, and kind of like a cloning kind of thing.
Maybe.
But it's got a very limited lifespan. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's something like that. That's where my mind was going as well with this kind of thing, where I'm thinking, well, what's going on here? Yeah. Hey, if they have this, they don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel there, do they? If they have access perhaps to the genomes of creatures that are extinct now, that still have these genomes, they could, pump out these things.
What was it? I had a couple of, like a week ago, I heard that they had discovered, oh my God, I can't remember, some type of a fossil, but it was so fresh that they thought that they could extract DNA material from it. Oh, Marlene, I wish I could remember what it was, but it was something that you think, God, what was that? And of course, all the time, I don't know, you hear all the time in Siberia, all these mammoth carcasses that they find, that they're so fresh because they've been in cold, that you would think they can reproduce them. I'm almost positive, without knowing for sure, that they do have, with a CRISPR and all these different DNA technology, to clone.
I agree. Yeah.
Even if they have to, what they said, even if there's certain sequences that they have to fill in, even if it's a little bit corrupted, just fill it in with elephant, DNA, modern elephant DNA.
Yeah, the closest similar bet. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I'm sure that there's that technology out there. Do you think that this race, are they always going to remain like they are now on the periphery, like around us, but never with us? Or do you think they're ever going to actually come forward?
I'm pretty sure, without perhaps being 100% sure, let's just say I'm 90% sure that they are planning on some kind of revelation or disclosure. Now, the powers that be definitely know about them, and I believe that groups like Majestic 12 in UFO lore, and Area S4 at Nellis Air Force Base, and all these kinds of elements of UFO lore, I actually do believe that these kinds of ideas, they're onto something here. There is, I don't know if Majestic is still called Majestic or what they call themselves now, but there are definitely power structures. There's groups of individuals making decisions behind the scenes that are not in elected governments, that are permanently there, that are controlling this information. And there have been treaties between the Cryptoterrestrials and these elements, these people.
Right.
And a powerful faction of it lies in the United States, of course, behind S4.
Right, because there's a lot of these groups, like you said, Majestic 12, that even if technically on the record they're folded up and supposedly don't exist, they do, but just by another name.
That's right. Yeah, I think. Yeah, and they vote in different members, and there sort of might be like an overhaul of it. But still, there's groups in the world that are fulfilling this role where they're they've been the ones that have officially been meeting CTs and having treaties with them. The treaties, from what I understand, specify that the cryptoterrestrials are not meant to reveal themselves to the population of the Earth at large until people like Majestic take votes and say yay, say yes, and communicate that to them. That they've now, and every once in a while, these groups sit and have a vote again. Well, this is what I've read anyway, doing research into this kind of stuff. But that they've, up until this point, always said no, not yet. The people aren't ready. It'll devastate the economy.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking of it's not so much to protect them or protect us. It's what it would do to, I could tell everybody would be like, forget work, forget paying my bills. I think I'm just going to sit home and have a meltdown along those lines.
That's true. Yeah, that. And also the clean technology, like technologies. If they've got technologies, which they are prepared to share with us.
Right.
That are free and don't require you to pay any bills.
Wow, that would really,
And this is going to just destroy basically capitalism, at least the way we know it.
I don't know. Did you ever see this old movie when you said that? This is a movie, I want to say it's maybe 20 years old. A very young Keanu Reeves called Chain Reaction, where an inventor, he develops a system of free energy. But he insists on releasing it. Like, I'm going to give this out once they basically find how to work it, how to make it work. I'm going to give it to all the governments in the world. This belongs, the drama behind the movie is they end up getting part of the team gets killed because exactly what you just said. I was like, no, you cannot do that. You can't just, however altruistic your motivation is for it, you can't do that because it would just totally decimate all the economies, and because there's a lot of money involved in energy. How's that?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And there's a lot of people in the world that have my share of the wealth of what I know.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
Like the top 1% of the 1% have 99% of the wealth and all that kind of thing. I mean, they're holding on to that by way of
right. And and it makes you think, because sometimes I think to myself, this, going on the supposition that you describe, where we have some type of treaty between these ETs or crypto, whatever you want to call them, and a group or whoever it is, where, like you said, we come to an agreement, and but you got to lay low. I think to myself, really, at some point, you would think, if any of them really decided, they could say, I don't care. We're going to disclose to your entire planet. Sorry, forget it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's what's happening. I think that's what's happening because, I mean, some people are not impressed with the Pentagon, admitting what it's been admitting lately, saying it's not enough. Just saying yes. UFOs are some kind of real phenomenon, but we don't know what's behind them.
I have
and all that kind of stuff. People are going, no, go the whole way. Tell us aliens are real. This is.
I think that that film that they put out in 2017 that it showed like the pilot, like the little, supposedly it's a UFO moving in that film had been out from before. I remember when I saw it, I had gone to one of these meetings. You know which one I'm talking about? That it looks like this little thing moving. That how could it move? And basically, it's like a UFO. And when I saw it, I said, "Wait a minute! I've seen this before." As a matter of fact, at one of those UFO meetings that I went to in Miami, that we would get together every couple of months, I remember somebody from MUFON brought it and presented it. And I remember when they're like, they're disclosing this film taken of a UFO. And I was looking at it, I'm like, no, I couldn't have dreamt this. I already saw this. So I'm very suspicious of any disclosures made regarding UFOs, ETs. Very, very suspicious. And if they ever say anything, when you really analyze it, it's won't amount to anything. It's very generic.
It is, yeah. But it's almost, it might be like baby steps, like a drip-fed thing. If their first admission is, okay, we have been investigating UFOs. We were lying when we said we haven't been. Now we're telling the truth. I mean, they're still not telling the whole truth, of course, but they go, now we're telling the truth. Yes, we've been investigating UFOs and keeping an eye on this phenomenon for decades. Okay. yes, UFOs are some real objects in the sky, but we don't know what they are. And then they leave it at that for a few years, and people dwell on that and get used to it, and it becomes normal, mundane reality. And then they up the ante and go, oh, there was something we left out. We do know that the beings flying it have been visiting us, and we may have had some meetings with them in the past. And then they leave it at that for a couple of years, and then they come in. So that it's sort of like, heating a frog very slowly in the water rather than chucking a frog straight into boiling water when they just leap straight out again.
Do you think the timing of them admitting after so many years, of no, it's a weather balloon, it was a weather phenomena, anything but a UFO/ET. Do you think there's anything having to do with the timing, as in all of a sudden there's this interest or admission that what was it, about a month ago that NASA was asking theologians to look at, basically study how we would handle the admission or existence of extraterrestrials. And I'm thinking to myself, this is really weird. I mean,
something's moving. Something's afoot. In my opinion, it's the scenario that you mentioned before, Marlene, which is that the CTs or ETs or whatever you want to call them aren't playing anymore, and have decided that's the end of this treaty nonsense.
Right.
I think part of the CTs are environmentalists, really. I mean, I know it's a corny thing to say, but they are incredibly concerned at the destruction of our biosphere at the moment, the diminishment of biodiversity. And they themselves are not, culturally speaking, the kinds of people or beings that would keep pets. They don't train animals. They can act incredibly violently against animals and even people if they think that they're threatened. But you have this kind of slightly contradictory idea that nonetheless they appreciate biodiversity, the biosphere.
Right. They understand the importance.
And
the ecology of the planet.
Exactly.
Yes,
and we're taking it all too far. And it doesn't, like, I know that there's this big divide between, are humans responsible for global warming or are they not? Is it some natural cycle and all that kind of stuff? But in the end, that's a moot point because we certainly are destroying the biodiversity of the planet in lots of other ways.
More aggressively, pollution, even though we've done a lot, but what we do with our wastes, with plastics, stuff that's not biodegradable. Absolutely.
The sea is being filled with this stuff. Of course, logging and destroying all the forests, the lungs of the earth. So I think we're up to a point now where the powers that be, like Majestic, or the power structure behind Majestic, and or whatever you want to call them, the shadow governments of the world, or whatever, whoever they are, they've had long enough to vote and play this game where the CTs aren't allowed to show themselves yet. No, they voted again.
Yeah, give us another 10 years. Give us another 20 years. I have a feeling that's something, maybe, like you said, maybe something they're saying, okay, we can't buy any more time, or maybe they themselves have told them, what, if by a certain date, let's say 2030, for example, you guys have not done or admitted, or this is it. You've been preparing them long enough. You came out with ET, the extraterrestrial, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We've given you enough time to prep the psyche of humanity for the existence of extraterrestrials. No more time. Yeah, you guys, or if not, like I say, we're going to land the mothership on the front lawn of the White House. Something where nobody can deny it. It's like you can't weather balloon this out of. With all the stories that have been told, of, and I've heard that, luckily, you have people that were in the military that once they, they retired, they came forward and basically admitted to some of these things, because otherwise we'd be more in the dark than we are now.
Yeah, well, that's true as well. Yeah, there are people that are coming out and admitting things. I think there's a fair few people that, are thought of as being whistleblowers, but in a way they're not really whistleblowers in the sense that I can sort of, even if they are thinking of themselves as whistleblowers, they nonetheless sense that there's a change in the wind.
Yes.
That it's through, not just the Pentagon making these admissions, but just in general, more academics and public intellectuals and people that outside of the UFO scene who would never have gone near any of this and never touched it.
Oh, no.
For fear of destroying their careers, being tarnished and ridiculed.
Yes.
Writing books about this kind of stuff and saying, oh, I was interested in this all along. Here's a book I've written. And people go,
well, you know what?
Cool.
And I've heard that for many years back in the 40s, 50s, when especially after Roswell and all these, that even any academics or scientists, anybody that went in the direction of trying to prove it, they were sabotage their careers. Or if they were if they were at a university, they would be pulled in and given the speech like, leave that alone, or you're going to lose your tenure.
Yeah, for sure.
Don't go there. I've heard that happened quite a lot, where anybody that really had a genuine, like somebody, how can I say, with some type of authority, that if they came out with a book, like you said, people would pay attention to it. I've heard that a lot of them were sidelined, like don't investigate that anymore. I
think that's been the way of it for decades, up until just this last year or two. Like you're getting people, like this, the famous Australian journalist, Ross Coulthart, who wrote the book In Plain Sight that was just released recently. He wouldn't have done that a few years ago. This guy who's like a high-profile journalist. And I know that people like George Knapp have been doing it forever, but he's a little bit of a special case where he was prepared to risk his career for this, and it sort of worked out for him to a certain extent. But with someone like Ross Coulthart, he probably had an interest all of this time, I'd imagine.
Right.
I don't think he suddenly has an interest, but he seemed to have, all of a sudden he's decided, I'm going to write this book, and he's allowed to, really. Now, whether he's been told he's allowed to by someone,
or he's just decided.
Oh, yeah, he feels like the whistleblowers that are coming out a lot now, that there's this change in the wind, that you're not necessarily now, you're allowed to. I mean, it's like the Pentagon has said, yes, you're all allowed to talk about this now. And we're supposed to go, oh, thanks, yay, we've been given permission by our masters, but it's true,
But you know what, this thing with, when you said that thing about George Knapp, let's say in Skinwalker Ranch, I don't think at the beginning George Knapp thought he was going to find what they found. No, I think that when he went out there with a group of scientists and the people that were there after the Sherman, well, I know the Sherman stayed there a little bit, they overlap, but they were there trying to capture. Yeah. I don't think at the beginning him or any of them really, because one thing is when you have a family telling you what hey, we had just arrived and we had a wolf come and try to basically in front of us take a calf.
Yeah, as big as a horse.
Right. And, you could sit there and go, these people seem credible, but I didn't see this. And I think that George Knapp and that team at the beginning didn't realize the phenomena that they were going to witness all the time that they were there. And then it just, so much so that it was like, we don't need them to tell us. We're having our own firsthand experience, despite having cameras. And I even heard that one time they witnessed a creature, for lack of a better word, coming out of the bottom of a saucer or a spaceship. I mean, they saw some way out things that I'd be like, holy,
sure.
And again, he wasn't by himself. He had a group of people there to back up his story.
Like the National Institute for Discovery Science, with like Colin Callagher, Robert Bigelow's little group.
Yeah, Bigelow's out there now, and well, no, I'm sorry, Bigelow was there before, but everybody that's been out there have been, after the Sherman family, they've tried to find proof. The last group that's out there now, which has been conducting, they themselves, you could tell, they're like, they don't get it.
Oh, every time. Yeah. This is the series, isn't it? I haven't actually watched.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I admire that they're trying to do a very scientific approach. But you could tell that sometimes they don't know whether to look up at the sky or under the ground or where.
Yeah.
They're just like, okay, we think it's coming from above, but then we're getting readings from under the ground. They have some of them having physical symptoms. Right. And I myself, I looked up reports of that high school teacher that lived there. This was back in the 50s. I found the articles where
wow.
he was reporting on strange lights and UFO kind of stuff back in the 50s. And he was a high school teacher. And, this was a small town where they would write it up on their local newspaper. And I know that, I'm not sure if it's one of his children or his grandchildren, came forward with his notebook, which this obviously didn't come out in the newspapers during that time. But it shows that at that time, they did write-ups about him, that he would go out and interview these people that live there. And,
cool.
they brought like that portfolio of all his little interviews, handwritten notes, way back when none of them ever thought what was going to come afterwards. To me, it personally lends veracity to that there was some type of phenomena happening there.
Yeah, and it's been ongoing. Yeah.
Ongoing, and even from before. And your theory, you think then, is that this is one of the locations where this species has like a home base or some place where they spend time at?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, an underground habitation. I call them habitations, but I suppose you could say facilities, or but I call them habitations because they actually live in these things,
Okay.
They're not just facilities to park craft or keep gear or tech, but actual dorms and places to reside in as they move around the earth, chasing the warmth. But and I think it's par for the course for areas near these underground habitations to be subjected to Skinwalker Ranch type high strangeness, especially if they decide they don't like you,
right,
and they decide that some kind of psychological warfare has to be enacted on you to move you along.
You know what? That scares a lot of people, though, to think about that, because we want to think of a more advanced race being more, what's the word I'm looking for? Kinder.
Yeah. Compassionate and things like that. I think they. I mean, this might sound like it's sort of like a cop out. Like, I think they give us what we do. Well, they think they give us what we deserve, in the sense that they don't think very much of us in a lot of ways, and they think that we usually only respond to threats.
Right.
And through interacting with us over centuries and millennia, even moving us along, having to deal with us, trying to scare us away or invite us in, and all, trying all different kinds of things out. There's certain protocols that they've been formulating over a very, very long time of dealing with us and living side by side with us. That certain things work and certain things don't. And it seems like aggression, instilling fear, playing tricks, playing mind games, scaring people away.
You would think that probably works very well, especially if they've been around for a long time. You hear about all these cultures that say that the mountain, don't go to the mountain, or don't go to that valley, or don't go because, it becomes a forbidden place.
Yeah, because there's bad juju there, there's monsters, or you get near it and you can feel the foreboding, and that. Let me ask you.
I've heard of the place in Australia called Black Mountain. Okay. That people have disappeared, like they go, and even people that go in searching for the person that disappeared is also.
Oh wow! Okay, I'm not familiar. I think I'm not familiar with Black Mountain. I'm gonna have to look that
let
up.
me tell you, I was reading about that, and it was so interesting because it's not only that certain people disappear, search parties or people that are sent in looking for the person that disappeared also. Like no trace, not like, how sometimes a few years later they'll find remains, skeletal, they'll go, now we realize they fell down a ravine or something like that.
Yeah,
no, no, nothing.
No, nothing. Oh, right, okay.
As a matter of fact, they even had, God, Marlene, I can't remember if it was pre-turn of the century, as in 19th to 20th, but they even had one time he was an outlaw, and he went running in there, and he disappeared. And officers that went after him, they're trying to hunt them down. They disappeared.
Okay, crikey.
That sounds super interesting.
That one. Yeah.
Yes. I was about to ask you if you'd heard. It's like, could this be one of those places?
Well, it sounds like it might be. Yeah, so I'll have to check that out for sure. I think I neglect researching Australia. I am Australian, and most of my research is taking place, like in I think
Yes,
I
I
read more
know.
about Canada and the US and Britain. Yeah, so I neglect my home turf a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I would love to. I would love for you to come back, Ryan, and talk more
Yeah,
about
that'd
this
be
because I
fun.
think it's fascinating. I could agree with you. I think that something is propelling us to full true disclosure. How's that?
Yeah, I think so.
Beyond what maybe the powers that be would like. It's not their timetable anymore.
I
And they're
feel,
trying to get ahead of the thing of like, before we just like they shove us
yeah,
aside and say,
yeah,
guess what? No more waiting.
yeah, and they're desperately trying to soften the blow when it comes because now they have to catch up, like you said.
Well,
Yeah,
think
that's what I
about it.
reckon.
Think about it.
Yeah,
It's almost like this is a loss of power because all of a sudden they're not the middleman. They're not the broker between us and the ETs, even though a lot of us sort of probably go, because one thing is what you see on TV and if we ever actually had some type of indisputable proof, that's it. This is it. But that's it. We don't need you anymore to say, hey, break the news to us. All of a sudden it's face to face between two species.
yeah.
That would be
Hopefully,
interesting.
yeah, for sure. It'll be very interesting. It's my, I mean, I don't know for sure. I have contact with these beings, and they do talk to me sometimes. They wanted me to write this book. It was something that they wanted me to do.
Okay.
And I said, why don't you do it yourself and do it under a pseudonym? And they're like, you need to humanize it. So they've been helping with it. Next time I come on, if I come on again,
Yes.
I'll tell you a little bit about that because some of the stuff that I put in my book and also I'm putting in my second book is stuff that they've informed me about, that they've shown me, like certain images that reflect Orion's belt in different cases and things like that I wouldn't have found on my own. So they're taking me by the hand and helping me in certain ways. Other things, I think, I'm putting stuff together myself, piecing it together. But anyway, yeah, but it'd be nice to come back on again at some stage, Marlene.
Absolutely. For my podcast listeners, what is your website address so people could find you?
Well, I've got a YouTube channel, which is just perfect. My name, Ryan Musgrave-Evans. And those who are interested in grabbing the book, it's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon.
Children of Orion, Finding the Cryptoterrestrials, published through Flying Disc Press. And yeah, it's paperback, hardback, and ebook. And thank you very much. Thanks.
No, on the contrary, my pleasure. Good luck in all your projects.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Marlene.
Take care.
See you later.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Wow. See? That's all. According to him, they're extraterrestrials, but also they've been, in other words, they've maybe originally a long time ago, they were ETs, as in totally off Earth, off planet. But because and it makes sense that, they've been here part of this planet for so long that it's almost like they're part of our planet, even though if you want to consider them a different species, kind of. And, according to him, a lot of folklore, fairies, goblins, things that people from ancient times, this is how they explain phenomena or beings that kind of human looking, but not really. And maybe according to their understanding had magical powers. This is how, which makes sense. People in those times describe things within the capability that they have of describing things. And I think that's fascinating because I'm sure everybody's seen, the show Ancient Aliens, which describes how all these ETs supposedly had some possible influence on us from ancient civilizations onward. But they're always, how can I say, here, but not part of us per se, even though I'm sure everybody's heard about hybrid programs, whether it's mutual in the sense of, okay, we agree with it, or whether they're stealing our genetic material by abduction, take your pick. But it's almost always been the way they portray extraterrestrials is whether, what's the word I'm looking for? Whether they're not aggressive or whether they're just objective. Maybe they're just using it. They're never really part of us, totally separate. They're not part of this earth. They're visiting here for whatever reason, whether they're studying us, whether they need our genetic material, whether, who knows, they got nothing better to do. But I like his approach of the Cryptoterrestrial, which is ETs that have been here for so long that they now have become part of us. And for all we know, maybe the descendants they themselves have are part human. They might not look exactly like us, but because of hybridization, maybe for hundreds or thousands of years, they're like us. And maybe that's also the reason why they stayed here, that we're genetically compatible. In other words, they could reproduce with our genetic material or vice versa. You hope. Because otherwise, because people don't understand. Sometimes species, you can't. They're not compatible. You can't make them. You can't produce anything. And every once in a while, yeah. In some cases where you get certain, even let's say like the lions and the tigers or the horse and the donkey, even the offspring will be sterile, if you get it to happen. So maybe that's why they've stuck around. That's maybe why we're so interesting. Kind of. But anyway, guys, last show I talked about possibly talking about whatchamacallit, talking about interesting paranormal news. And I said, you know what, before I go full hog on that, like a separate show, even if it's a short 20 or 25-minute clip, I'm going to do it at the end of the show or at the beginning. I still haven't figured it out. One of the ones that I found, which is recent, I'm sure most of you remember one of the Ghost Adventures episodes in the UK. This is already an older show of the Ram Inn. Okay. And this Ram Inn, as a matter of fact, I remember that it had its kind of funny moments with Zach Bagans and things that happened to him. And also the gentleman, Mr. Humphreys, who was the owner of this. Let me see if I can bring on the. Okay. Let's see who it is. Let's see if I can get this over here. All right. Let's see if I can get this over here, and I'm not even sure what's showing there. Okay. I don't know. I'm hoping that what I'm looking at, what you guys are seeing, and I don't know if that is the case because I am. You know what? I wonder if, you know what? I'm going to do something here. Let's see. Let's see if we can make this work. Oh, maybe this is what I needed to do all along. Because let me tell you something. Share screen. All right, let's see. I think I got it now. There we go. Okay. This is the Haunted Rams Inn in the UK. And like I said, a lot of people became, it's been around. It's a very famous haunted location in the UK for a long time. But I think a lot of people became aware of it after after it came out on Ghost Adventures. And basically, what they're talking about here says an English woman who insists she's living in one of the most haunted houses. And this, I'm sorry, is according to the New York Post. An English woman who insists she's living in one of the most haunted houses in the world has revealed the creepy items she has discovered throughout the years. Her name is Caroline Humphreys. Moved into the ancient Ram Inn in 1968 when she was just 8 years old. It's located in southwest England, in the town of Wootton-under-Edge, Gloucestershire. She explained that her parents initially purchased a 1,000-year-old property to run it as a bed and breakfast, but over the years they discovered they were getting more than they bargained for. A diviner, according to her, she's quoted as saying, "A diviner told my dad there were children buried all over the place, and when he dug, he found the bones and the daggers wrapped with them, which implied sacrificial killing." This is her right there. Okay. And it looks like she's doing some type of Ouija divination with a glass, and I take it this is a bedroom. This is creepy. A specialist discovered the bones were not animal bones, but rather human remains. I don't know what that is, because that's not a human. That right there, that's not a human jaw. Okay. And this, I guess, is a sample of I guess the bones that they've dug up along the way. Okay. And it says here, some of the strange findings include piles of bones buried in the dirt alongside a set of daggers underneath flagstones in the lounge dug up by Caroline's late dad, John Humphreys. These are some other things. Okay, recently, Caroline's partner found more bones under the staircase of a room on the ground floor, including a jaw, skull, spine, and femur bones. Okay, I think this is a picture of her dad, who passed away already. There was an archaeological report on the daggers, and they said the dates of them are undefined, but they were of great age. Sadly, the daggers, which were in a glass display case, were stolen around 2014 when my father was in the house showing a group of visitors around. Her father, John Humphreys, found many of the grisly objects hidden in the home, which date back to 1145, or the past 3 decades, including a pile of bones buried in the dirt alongside a set of daggers, which he dug up underneath a sandstone located in the lounge area. Dad took the bones he had found to a specialist, who informed him that they were definitely not animal bones, so the mystery of whose remains they are and why they were buried with daggers needs to be investigated. Other curious finds include a 500-year-old mummified cat inside a wall. Maybe that was what that mummified cat, which Humphrey said she believed was used to ward off witches. Due to the lime render and Cotswold stone walls, the cat was able to be preserved for centuries and was considered in good shape upon its discovery, according to preservationists in the Stroud Museum. Considered a grade 2 listed in, which means it warrants every effort of preservation. In England, it was reportedly built on an ancient pagan burial ground. Over the years, it has become a popular destination for paranormal investigations by ghost hunters from around the world. And that's, I guess, one of the rooms. And this is another room. I know one of these was the one that Zach Bacon's, something was going on there. They heard growling or something. No, this was it. This is a pit. Yeah, according to them, the mummified cat is 500 years old. Okay. Ghost hunters have claimed to witness countless strange encounters and moving objects. The inn is near a church, which was built by slaves and Catholic monks who lived in the home. Humphrey believes there are secret cellars and passageways connecting the inn to the church that have yet to be tracked down. The caveat in the deeds from Whitbread's, from when we bought it, states that the building's cellars have been bricked up, but we still don't know where they are. Interesting. Very interesting. And the thing is this. It's very possible that the inn was built on a pagan burial site. But from what I understand, and I'm not an archaeologist, but I usually, the longer, more time, in other words, the deeper artifacts are, the longer, the older it is. I think to myself, for you to be digging under your staircase or on the side of a wall and find bones and daggers, I don't think that's from the pagan times. I'm not saying, there might be a lot of pagan stuff way deep in there, but 1145 on this thing of finding bones and daggers, and we're talking here sacrifices, and that's it leads me to believe. And the reason I guess my point is, a lot of people think, okay, pre-Christian, Britain, they're, I'm sure you've heard of what they call the bog people, that some people think were sacrifices made by their druids, maybe under stressful times. There's part of the religious practices where they were left in these bogs and tied, and they've been found preserved. But if these bones and daggers or sacrifices, especially of children, were done, we're talking 1000 AD, we're talking by then, UK in this area is paganism, it's Christian, it's Catholic. And they even had monks. That leads me to believe that they were practicing dark magic or the equivalent of Satanism in that area, and they were sacrificing children. I don't know. I'm not an archaeologist, but I would think any type of pagan ritual sacrifices would be buried so deep underneath there that you just couldn't find it because you dug up under your staircase or you dug in a little wall. That seems too shallow for me to be pre-Christian, pagan, which is, there must be a lot of weird stuff going on in that place. And I'm being kind when I just say weird. And when Zach Bagans described growling coming from there, I was like, no kidding. I'm sure there's that and much worse. Let me tell you something, that place, I mean, besides the fact that it's had 1,000 years at least as an inn, God, that must be Grand Central Station there. Weird, unusual, and I'm going to tell you, probably a lot of dark, eerie stuff going on. Anyway, guys, before I forget, please sign up for my newsletter. It's coming out once, maybe twice a week the most. I write up crazy articles, book projects, weird stuff. Like I said, any announcements, I usually make them on the newsletter. If you want to listen to any of the podcast versions of any of the shows, all you need to do is go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com or MarlenePardo.com, and I have links there where you could listen on your browser or download the MP3 file without commercial interruption. I have links to the different podcast platforms that you'll find the show at: Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, you name it. You can find me on Alexa, on Sonos. Look for Stories of the Supernatural, and you'll find me there or Nightshade Diary or Supernatural Storytime if you like weird little scary story podcast. Whichever. Miami Ghost Chronicles is always going to be your one-stop shop for finding anything having to do with the show, even if it's links to videos. Remember, I'm on BitChute, I'm on Steemit. Besides YouTube, I'm all over the place with the video versions. And I want to thank you for being part of my audience, coming back every week and sharing this time with me, because believe me, I have a lot of fantastic guests coming on. If you have any suggestions for either topics or guests that you have seen in the past and would like to have them return, or maybe you've seen them or heard them on some other show, please shoot me an email, Marlene@MiamiGhostChronicles.com, and I will try by all means to bring them on the show so that, we can just discuss some spooky stuff. I'm thinking of also, maybe by the time this is a little bit staggered, I'm thinking of doing a Fat Tuesday live stream. We'll talk about some weird stuff, like, I'm sure I can think of something for Fat Tuesday, since a lot of people celebrate. This is the time before you go into Lent, which leads into the Easter season, and which is when you give up. And in any words, this is like the last hurrah before you have to buckle down. So I'm thinking of having a Fat Tuesday live stream, but I will update you guys most probably on the newsletter if that's going to come through. So again, guys, thank you so much for being part of my audience. Come back, and thank you. Till next time. Take care.